The cold air in the offices of Mercer and Associates hung thick with the scent of old paper lemon polish and money so old it had forgotten its own value. Nathan Carter sat perfectly still, his back straight, a habit beaten into him by years of military service. To the casual observer, he appeared calm, a man simply waiting, but inside every nerve fired as he cataloged the room's exits, the weight of the crystal decanter on the lawyer's desk, and the slight tremor in his cousin's expensive Italian shoe. His body remained a coiled spring in a world made of glass. Nathan was a man carved from the lean, hard parts of the world. In his mid-30s, his tall frame was more sinew than bulk, quiet strength evident in his posture. His short brown hair already showed distinguished threads of silver at the temples, and his rugged face, though etched with lines of hardship, held a fundamental kindness in the set of his jaw. His startlingly clear blue eyes carried a profound wariness. Dressed in a simple gray t-shirt under a faded blue plaid shirt, worn jeans and sturdy work boots, he was a former Navy SEAL, a man trained to be a ghost in the most dangerous places on earth, yet he had never felt more out of place than in this opulent tomb. Across the desk sat his cousin Vincent, younger by 5 years, and his physical opposite. Where Nathan was structure, Vincent was soft. His suit was expertly tailored, but seemed a size too small for his fleshy frame, and his face, usually set in a look of smug satisfaction, now wore a mask of impatient greed. He tapped his fingers on the polished wood, the sound like tiny irritating hammers against Nathan's frayed senses. Presiding over the uncomfortable silence was Mr. Mercer, a lawyer whose face seemed carved from old parchment, all dry lines and thin, bloodless lips. He adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat, the sound rustling like dead leaves. We now come to the final bequests of my client, the late Mr. Osborne. Samuel Carter. Samuel Carter, his grandfather. A man Nathan remembered only in faded, sun-drenched fragments, the scent of salt and engine oil, a calloused hand on his shoulder, a gruff voice that sounded like rocks tumbling in the surf. They had been estranged for nearly 15 years, ever since Nathan had enlisted against his family's wishes. Mr. Mercer droned on, listing assets, stocks, and properties. A portfolio of significant value went to Vincent. A summer home in Newport went to Vincent. The entirety of the Carter Shipping Company shares went to Vincent. With each bequest, Vincent's smirk grew wider, and he shot a pitying glance at Nathan, the poor lost soldier who had traded a fortune for a uniform. And finally, Mr. Mercer paused, peering over his glasses at Nathan, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes. For my grandson, Nathan Carter. Vincent let out a soft, condescending chuckle. The lawyer ignored him. To Nathan, I leave my home at Wolf's Point off the coast of Maine and everything upon it. I also entrust to his care my loyal companion Ranger. He paused, letting the words settle before reading the codicil, the part that would echo in Nathan's mind for days to come. This bequest is made with a specific understanding. Wolf's Point is given to Nathan because he is the only one in this family who understands the value of a silent watch. Silence, the hum of the city seemed to fade. A silent watch. The word struck Nathan with the force of a physical blow. It was a term from his world, a language of lonely nights spent staring into the oppressive dark of duty, performed without praise or recognition. How could his grandfather, the man he barely knew, have understood? Vincent broke the stillness with a loud, incredulous laugh. Wolf's Point, that worthless piece of rock, and a dog. He shook his head, his face a caricature of disbelief and scorn. The old man really lost his mind at the end. Unless, he added, his eyes narrowing with a new kind of avarice. He buried treasure out there. You better start digging, cousin. It's all you're going to get. Nathan didn't respond. He felt nothing from the insult, nothing from the loss of the fortune. He felt only the profound, stunning impact of that single phrase. A silent watch. For the first time in years, he felt seen. After Vincent had swaggered out, leaving the scent of expensive cologne in his wake, Mr. Mercer leaned forward. Your cousin misunderstands your grandfather's intent. Samuel was a unique man. He wasn't sentimental, but he was deliberate. The lawyer explained the arrangements. There was a small trust managed by his office set aside specifically for the upkeep of the property, a modest sum, just enough for basic supplies and fuel. Enough for a man to live simply. Your grandfather also made arrangements for the dog. Mr. Mercer continued, pushing a folder across the desk. He prepaid a local fisherman, a man named Gus, to make a trip out to the point every 2 days with food and fresh water after his passing. He wanted to ensure Ranger was cared for until you arrived. Nathan opened the folder. Inside was a deed, a hand-drawn map of the coastline marking Wolf's Point and the fisherman's contact information. "What kind of dog is he?" Nathan asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "A German shepherd, about 5 years old. A large one, I'm told. All gray and white like sea foam on a winter sea. A serious stoic animal from what your grandfather described. A serious dog for a serious place." Nathan stared at the map, at the dot in the vast blue of the Atlantic. An inheritance not of wealth but of isolation. A crumbling house, a dog named Ranger, and a legacy contained in 6 resonant words. To Vincent, it was a joke, a pile of worthless rock. But to Nathan, a man drowning in the noise of a world he no longer fit into, it sounded like the only thing that could ever save him. It sounded like a quiet place to finally stand down from his watch. There was one more thing to consider, one more responsibility that shaped every decision Nathan made. As he walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright sunlight, he checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Mrs. Henderson, his son's babysitter. A knot formed in his stomach as he called her back. "Ethan's fine," she assured him before he could ask. But that school of his called again. He had another episode. Nathan's heart sank. It had been happening more frequently since Lisa's death, panic attacks, outbursts, moments when his 10-year-old son simply couldn't process the overwhelming grief that had swallowed their lives. The school counselor used words like adjustment disorder and grief response. But Nathan recognized it for what it was, the same beast that clawed at his own chest in the dark hours of the night. "I'll be right there," he promised, already calculating the shortest route through midday traffic. When he arrived at their small apartment, Ethan was sitting on the floor of his room, meticulously arranging his collection of seashells, a legacy from his mother. The boy looked up, his face a smaller, softer version of Nathan's own, but with Lisa's warm brown eyes. Those eyes now carried shadows no child should know. "They're sending me home again," Ethan said flatly, "just because I got mad. Justin said Mom died because she wanted to get away from us, and I pushed him. He didn't even fall down hard." Nathan sat down beside his son, careful not to disturb the pattern of shells. The anger that flared at the cruelty of children was pushed aside for his son's sake. What that boy said was wrong. "Your mom fought to stay with us until her very last breath. You know that." Ethan nodded, but his shoulders remained tight with tension. Nathan looked at the shells, then at the marine biology books stacked neatly by the bed, then at the calendar on the wall with its red X's counting down to the end of the school year, just 3 weeks away. A decision crystallized in his mind, suddenly clear and inevitable. "How would you feel about spending the summer by the ocean, somewhere quiet, just you and me? We'd have to fix up an old house, live pretty simply. There's this place in Maine that belonged to your great-grandfather." Ethan looked up, the first spark of interest in his eyes in months. "Really? Not going back to summer school?" "Really. And there's a dog there too, a big one named Ranger." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan smiled, a small, fragile thing, but genuine. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Perhaps Samuel's strange bequest was exactly what they both needed: a place to heal, to be quiet, to stand a different kind of watch together. The long drive north to Maine was a slow exorcism of the city's stale air. For 2 days, Nathan drove his old pickup truck, eating up miles of asphalt that separated the lawyer's paneled office from the rugged coastline of his inheritance. With each passing town, the buildings grew smaller, the trees taller, and the sky wider. The noise in his head, the constant buzzing hypervigilance that had been his companion since his last tour, began to recede, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind. In the passenger seat, Ethan gradually transformed as well. The further they got from the city, the more he emerged from his shell, pointing out interesting sights, asking questions about Maine, about the ocean, about the dog waiting for them. It was as if some invisible weight was lifting from his small shoulders with each mile marker they passed. They arrived in the small fishing town of Harbor Bay as a damp, gray dusk was settling over the harbor. The air smelled sharply of salt pine and low tide, a clean, honest smell that seemed to scour their lungs. Following Mr. Mercer's directions, Nathan found a weathered pier where a man was mending a net under the yellow glow of a single bare bulb. This was Gus. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from the same driftwood that littered the shore, his face a roadmap of deep lines etched by sun and sea. He wore a thick, oil-stained wool sweater and his hands, though gnarled with age, moved with practiced, efficient grace. He looked up as Nathan and Ethan approached, his pale blue eyes assessing missing nothing. "You must be the Carter boy," Gus said, his voice a low rumble like stones shifting on the seabed. There was no warmth in it, but no hostility either. It was a simple statement of fact. "Nathan," he corrected, gently extending a hand. "And this is my son, Ethan. You must be Gus." Gus wiped his hand on his trousers before taking Nathan's, his grip surprisingly strong. "Aye, your grandfather was a good man, kept to himself, but he was fair." He nodded toward the end of the pier. "Your ride's waiting." Tied to a cleat was a small, sturdy motorboat. Its blue paint was chipped and faded, its hull scarred from countless encounters with docks and rocks, but it sat low and steady in the water. It was a workboat built for purpose, not for show. And sitting in the stern, as still and silent as a statue, was a dog. Nathan's breath caught. The lawyer's description hadn't done him justice. Ranger was magnificent, a large German shepherd, his thick coat a stunning blend of silver gray and stark white, the colors of a winter storm over a churning sea. His ears were erect, his posture alert, and his intelligent, amber-colored eyes were fixed on Nathan. There was no barking, no wagging tail, just a quiet, intense scrutiny. He was as Samuel Carter had described a serious dog for a serious place. Nathan moved slowly, approaching the boat. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, making himself smaller. "Hey, Ranger, I'm Nathan. This is Ethan." The dog's head tilted slightly. He rose from his seated position and walked to the edge of the boat, his paws silent on the fiberglass. He leaned forward, sniffing the air, his gaze never leaving Nathan's. In that moment, Nathan saw not just an animal, but a fellow sentinel. He saw the same watchfulness, the same quiet understanding of solitude that he felt in his own bones. It was an instant, profound connection, a silent acknowledgement that passed between two beings accustomed to the lonely watch. "He's been waiting," Gus said from behind him. "Since Samuel passed, he just sits and watches the sea like he knew you were coming." Nathan reached out a hand, palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Ranger leaned forward and gently touched his wet nose to Nathan's fingers. A current seemed to pass between them, a transfer of trust. Then for the first time, the dog's tail gave a single slow thump against the side of the boat. It was enough. Ethan, who had been hanging back, now stepped forward, his movements careful and respectful. The boy and the dog regarded each other with equal curiosity. Ranger sniffed Ethan's outstretched hand, then to Nathan's surprise gave it a gentle lick. Ethan's face lit up with quiet joy. Gus helped them load their supplies, a few boxes of rations, tools, and duffel bags with their belongings. He showed Nathan the basics of the boat's engine, a simple, reliable diesel that coughed to life with a puff of black smoke. "She's not pretty, but she'll get you there and back." Gus grunted. "Your grandfather left her for you, paid in full." As Nathan untied the ropes, Gus put a hand on his shoulder. "Wolf's Point is a hard place. It asks a lot and gives little back. But your grandfather saw something out there. Hope you find it." With a final nod, Nathan pushed off. The small boat chugged out of the harbor, leaving the warm lights of the town behind. Ranger stood at the bow, his paws planted firmly, his silhouette a noble shape against the darkening sky. He was perfectly at home on the moving water, a true creature of this new saltwater kingdom. Ethan sat beside the dog, one hand lightly resting on Ranger's back, his face turned toward the open sea, alive with wonder. After 20 minutes, it appeared, Wolf's Point. It was a jagged tooth of dark granite rising from the slate-gray water, more intimidating and desolate than Nathan had imagined. Perched precariously on its highest point was a small dark shape, a wooden house that looked like it was one strong gust of wind away from being reclaimed by the sea. Vincent's mocking laugh echoed in Nathan's memory, a worthless piece of rock. Navigating carefully, Nathan found the small, sheltered cove his grandfather had marked on the map. He cut the engine and let the boat drift the last few feet until its hull scraped against a crude stone landing. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the crash of waves against the far side of the rock and the cry of a distant gull. This was isolation in its purest form. Ranger leaped effortlessly from the boat to the rock, then turned, waiting patiently. Ethan followed his movements, tentative but excited. Nathan secured the boat and grabbed a bag, starting the steep climb to the house. The wind whipped at their clothes, cold and sharp with the taste of salt. The house was even worse up close. The wood was bleached gray and splintered, the windows clouded with salt spray, and one of the shutters hung from a single hinge banging a mournful rhythm in the wind. Nathan pushed the door open. It groaned in protest. The inside was sparse, filled with the ghosts of old furniture and the smell of damp disuse and the ever-present sea. A wave of despair, cold and heavy, washed over Nathan. What was he doing here? This wasn't a refuge. It was a tomb. But then a warm, solid pressure pressed against his leg. He looked down. Ranger was standing beside him, leaning against him, his amber eyes looking up with an expression of unwavering loyalty. The dog's simple, grounding presence cut through the despair. This wasn't just a house. It was a shelter. It wasn't a tomb. It was a post. And they weren't alone. They had company. Ethan moved through the small space, exploring with the natural curiosity of a child. "Do we really get to live here, Dad?" His voice held no disappointment, only excitement. Nathan took a deep breath, the salt air filling his lungs. He dropped his bag on the floor, the sound echoing in the empty space. "Yeah, buddy, this is home now, at least for the summer." Something sparked in Ethan's eyes, a sense of adventure, of possibility. "Can I pick my room?" "Sure, there are probably 2 bedrooms upstairs." As Ethan bounded up the creaking stairs, Ranger at his heels, Nathan felt a sense of purpose beginning to kindle within him. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Let's get to work." The days on Wolf's Point bled into weeks, each one governed not by a clock or a calendar, but by the great slow breathing of the ocean. Time was measured in the rise and fall of the tide, the shifting of the sun across the sky, and the growing ache in Nathan's muscles. They fell into a rhythm, a Spartan routine that was both demanding and deeply restorative. Mornings began before sunrise, with Ranger nudging a cold, wet nose into Nathan's hand. They would start the day by walking the perimeter of their granite kingdom, a silent inspection of their post. Nathan would check the mooring on the boat, ensuring the ropes were secure, while Ethan collected interesting shells and sea glass. Ranger alternated between the two, sometimes padding alongside Nathan with military precision, other times bounding after Ethan with unexpected playfulness. The house, their battered fortress, demanded constant attention. Nathan, using the tools his grandfather had left behind, became a student of salvage and repair. He learned the unique groan each floorboard made, the way the wind whistled through a specific crack in the wall. He replaced rotten planks on the small porch, rehung the crooked shutter, and painstakingly scraped layers of salt crust from the window panes until slivers of clear daylight could finally pierce the gloom. Each swing of the hammer, each turn of the screwdriver was a focused physical act that left no room for the ghosts of the past. The loud, sharp sounds that would have sent him spiraling in the city were different here. They were sounds of creation, of mending. And when he flinched, Ranger would be there, a solid, reassuring presence at his side, grounding him in the here and now. His panic attacks, once crippling ambushes that left him breathless and shaking, began to lose their power. They still came, but they were shadows of their former selves, whispers of fear instead of roars. In the vast open emptiness of the sea and sky, the triggers of his trauma had nothing to echo against. The quiet work of survival was a powerful therapy, and the stillness of the point began to seep into his soul. Ethan, too, was transforming. Away from the pressures of school, the pitying glances of teachers, and the cruelty of other children, he became more relaxed, more present. He appointed himself the official wildlife observer of Wolf's Point, keeping a detailed journal of every birdfish and tide pool creature he encountered. He and Ranger were inseparable, the boy and the dog, forming a bond that required no words. They would spend hours exploring the lower reaches of the Rock, Ranger keeping a protective watch over his young charge. But it was more than just the peace of isolation that was healing them. It was the connection to each other, to a connection that had been strained by grief and trauma, but was now strengthening in this harsh, beautiful place. They talked more real conversations, not just the necessary exchanges of daily life. At night, by the light of an old kerosene lamp, Nathan would tell Ethan stories of his grandfather that he remembered from his own childhood visits to Maine. In turn, Ethan would share his discoveries from the day, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Their bond deepened beyond that of father and son. It became a partnership forged in shared solitude. They were two survivors holding a lonely outpost, communicating in a language that needed no words. When Nathan's frustration mounted over a stubborn nail or a warped piece of wood, Ethan would appear with exactly the tool he needed. When the familiar ache of loneliness settled on Ethan's shoulders as he watched a family of gulls, Nathan would sit beside him in silent understanding. To supplement their packaged rations, Nathan took up fishing. He found his grandfather's old rods and tackle box in a sea chest. He would cast his line off the western rocks, Ethan sitting patiently beside him. Ranger, a statue of gray and white against the dark stone. The repetitive motion was meditative, and the thrill of a tug on the line was a simple, uncomplicated joy. They would share their catch cooking the fish over a small fire pit Nathan built in the lee of a rock outcropping. They would eat together, watching the stars emerge in a brilliant, unpolluted canopy, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the steady wash of the surf. Yet amid this new peace, Nathan began to notice oddities about their sanctuary. The house, for all its apparent simplicity, had peculiar features that didn't align with its weathered exterior. The electrical wiring, though ancient, was military-grade, far too robust for a simple seaside cottage. Beneath one section of floorboards, he discovered a thin sheet of what appeared to be lead, an unusual choice for insulation. And the stone fireplace, unlike the rest of the house, was built with an engineer's precision, its foundation extending far deeper into the rock than necessary for stability. These incongruities nagged at him, whispering that there was more to Wolf's Point than a reclusive old man's retreat. Samuel Carter had been deliberate, Mr. Mercer had said. Nathan was beginning to understand just how deliberate. One afternoon, while repairing a small, water-damaged writing desk in the corner of the main room, he found a drawer that was stuck fast. After carefully working it loose, he discovered it was full, not of papers, but of a collection of leather-bound journals. They were his grandfather's. He sat on the floor, Ranger resting his head on his lap, and opened the first one. The handwriting was precise, the script of an engineer, but these were not personal diaries. They were logs filled with meticulous observations. For years, Samuel Carter had chronicled the life of this rock. There were detailed charts of tidal patterns, notes on the speed and temperature of the ocean currents that swirled around the point, and sketches of seabird migrations. But it was the last section of each journal that captivated him. His grandfather had written about what he called the songs of the ocean. He described the low-frequency hums that vibrated through the granite on calm nights, the distinct acoustic signatures of passing ships miles away, and the deep resonant groans the seabed would make during a storm. Samuel hadn't just been living on this rock. He had been listening to it, studying its voice, treating the entire point as a massive organic listening device. Nathan ran a hand over the intricate diagrams and pages of dense notations, a profound sense of awe settling over him. He was beginning to understand that his inheritance wasn't just a rock and a dog. It was a mystery. The discovery of the journals changed the texture of their days. The physical labor of repairing the house continued, but now Nathan's evenings were spent in study, poring over his grandfather's meticulous notes by the light of the kerosene lamp. The rhythmic crash of the waves outside was no longer just background noise. It was the symphony that Samuel Carter had spent years trying to decode. Nathan felt a growing connection to the grandfather he barely knew, a kinship of shared purpose that spanned across time. He was no longer just an inheritor, he was becoming an archivist. As he delved deeper into the journals, a pattern emerged. Samuel had been tracking specific acoustic anomaly sounds that shouldn't exist in nature, patterns that suggested artificial origins. At first, Nathan thought his grandfather had been chasing submarines, perhaps driven by Cold War paranoia. But the truth was far more complex. Samuel had been mapping something deeper, more persistent, a constant background hum that emanated from a specific point 12 miles offshore. Ethan, curious about his father's nightly studies, began to join him. The boy's natural aptitude for science made him an eager student, and Nathan found himself explaining concepts of acoustic engineering, sound propagation, and submarine detection systems, knowledge from his SEAL training that now served a different purpose. "Dad?" Ethan asked one evening, his finger tracing a diagram in one of the journals. "Why would great-grandpa care so much about sounds in the ocean?" Nathan considered the question, realizing he'd been wondering the same thing. "I think he was listening for something specific, something important. Like a secret message." Ethan's eyes widened with excitement. Maybe, or maybe he was just a sentinel, keeping watch over something no one else could hear. The boy nodded, solemnly processing this. "Like us now, we're the new sentinels." Nathan felt a surge of emotion at the simple truth of his son's words. "Yeah, buddy, just like that. A week after finding the journals, a cold, persistent rain began to fall, shrouding the point in a thick gray mist that blurred the line between sea and sky. It was the kind of weather that seeped into the bones, forcing them indoors. Nathan lit a fire in the stone hearth, the flames a welcome burst of orange and warmth against the gloom. He settled into an old armchair with one of the journals, while Ethan sprawled on the floor with a book of marine biology, occasionally reading interesting facts aloud. Ranger lay between them on the worn rug before the fire, his head resting on his paws. For an hour, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the drumming of the rain on the roof, the turning of pages, and Ethan's intermittent exclamations about fascinating sea creatures. Then Ranger stirred. He lifted his head, his ears twitching, and let out a low, almost inaudible whine. He rose and padded over to the hearth, sniffing intently at the large flat slab of granite that formed its base just to the left of the firebox. Nathan watched him over the top of the journal. "What is it, boy?" A mouse ranger ignored him. His sniffing became more frantic. He lowered his head and whined again, a note of quiet urgency in the sound. Then he did something he had never done inside the house before. He lifted a paw and scratched at the stone. The sound of his claws scraping against the rock was sharp and jarring in the quiet room. "Hey, easy," Nathan said, putting the journal down. "You'll wear your claws down to nothing." Ranger looked back at him, his amber eyes intense, and then deliberately turned and scratched the stone again, harder this time. A low, guttural bark escaped his throat, not a sound of aggression, but of deep frustration, as if he were trying to tell Nathan something vital and lacked the words to do so. "What's wrong with him?" Ethan asked, abandoning his book to kneel beside the dog. Nathan stood up and walked over, crouching beside them. He ran a hand over the stone. It was cold solid and seemed no different from any other part of the hearth. "There's nothing here, Ranger." But Ranger was relentless. He paced back and forth in front of the stone, whining and nudging Nathan's hand with his nose, pushing him toward the hearth. Ethan, caught up in the dog's urgency, began to examine the stone more closely, running his small fingers along the seams where it met the wooden floor. Nathan felt a flicker of annoyance, but it was quickly replaced by something else: trust. He remembered the nights in Afghanistan when the team's combat tracker dog would freeze, refusing to move, alerting them to a hidden explosive device that would have killed them all. He had learned then, in the most brutal of classrooms, that the instincts of a highly trained animal were a language you ignored at your peril. And everything about Ranger, from his stoic demeanor to his unwavering focus, screamed that he was more than just a pet. All right, I get it," Nathan conceded, patting the dog's broad head. "You win." He examined the stone slab more closely. It was massive, set flush with the floorboards. But as he ran his fingers along the seam where it met the wooden floor, he felt it a slight give, a minuscule shift that was imperceptible to the eye. "Dad, there's something weird here," Ethan said, pointing to a tiny gap between the stone and the floor. "I think I can see light." Nathan moved to where Ethan was pointing. Sure enough, in the narrow space between the stone and the floor, there was a faint bluish glow so subtle it would have been invisible in daylight. He pressed down on the edge of the slab with all his weight, and he heard a faint grating sound. His heart began to beat a little faster. He went to the sea chest where he stored his tools and pulled out a long, heavy-duty crowbar. Wedging the flattened tip into the tiny gap, he put his shoulder into it and heaved. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan of protest, the heavy stone slab tilted upwards. Beneath it was not dirt or foundation, but a dark, hollow space. The air that rose from it was cool and dry, with a faint metallic scent. And the source of the blue glow was now clear, a small LED light, still functioning after who knew how many years, illuminating a lead-lined box built right into the foundation of the house. "Dad, it's glowing," Ethan whispered, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. "Like buried treasure in the movies." Ranger stood beside them, panting softly, his tail giving a few slow, satisfied thumps against the floor. The mission had been accomplished, the message delivered. Reaching inside, Nathan's fingers brushed against two objects. The first was a book similar to the other journals, but wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. The second was a heavy object made of brass. He lifted it out. It wasn't a key in any traditional sense. It was a solid piece of machined brass with a T-shaped handle and a cylindrical end that was cut with a series of complex, interlocking notches and grooves. It looked more like a specialized component for a piece of machinery than something used to open a door. "What is it?" Ethan asked, reaching out to touch the brass object reverently. I'm not sure yet, Nathan admitted, but I think it's important. He set the strange key aside and unwrapped the journal. He opened it to the first page. The same precise engineering script greeted him, but this time it was different. My name is Samuel Carter. In the year 1973, I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy, where I served as a senior acoustic engineer in the Sound Surveillance System project. Nathan read the words again and then a third time. An acoustic engineer, the Navy. The journals filled with notes on the songs of the ocean suddenly snapped into sharp focus. This was never a fisherman's hobby. This was the life's work of a specialist, a man who had been professionally trained to listen to the secrets of the deep. He slowly looked up from the page, his gaze falling on the strange brass key glinting in the firelight. The mystery of Wolf's Point, he realized, was only just beginning. "Dad, what does it say?" Ethan pressed, unable to contain his curiosity. "It says your great-grandfather was a very interesting man," Nathan replied, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd found. "More interesting than I ever knew." The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, but Nathan felt no chill. The words on the page in front of him were a fire of their own, burning away decades of mystery. He sat on the floor, the oilcloth-wrapped journal open in his lap, Ranger a warm, heavy presence leaning against his side. Ethan sat cross-legged beside him, hanging on every word as Nathan read aloud, carefully editing the more sensitive parts for his son's ears. Sound Surveillance System. The official project name was SOSUS, but in Samuel Carter's private writings, the project came alive. This journal was different from the others. It was not a log of observations. It was a confession, a manifesto, and a blueprint for a secret world. With a growing sense of disbelief, Nathan read about the genesis of Wolf's Point. His grandfather, a brilliant but cantankerous engineer, had discovered that this specific, worthless piece of rock was a geological anomaly. The unique density and composition of the granite deep within the point acted as a natural acoustic amplifier, a massive passive lens that could focus the faintest sounds from the deep ocean channel a dozen miles offshore. It was, he wrote, a gift from the earth, a natural listening post more sensitive than any man-made array of the time. The journal detailed the secret construction, a project Samuel had undertaken after his discharge, funded by his own savings in a quiet patent he had sold. He described with an engineer's pride how he had spent 5 years hollowing out a chamber deep within the stone, a feat of solitary backbreaking labor. Then came the part that made Nathan sit up straighter, the power source. Samuel had been obsessed with self-sufficiency, with creating something that could not be shut down by cutting a power line from the mainland. And then he had designed and built a revolutionary tidal generator using a series of concealed underwater turbines in a narrow channel on the north side of the point. The system harnessed the immense, relentless power of the ebbing and flowing tides. It was a self-contained, self-sustaining power source that would, in his words, run as long as the moon pulls the sea. He had even installed a complex series of batteries and regulators to ensure a steady supply, a design so elegant and far-sighted it took Nathan's breath away. But as the journal progressed, the tone of pride was replaced by a deep, simmering bitterness. Samuel wrote of his final years in the Navy, of presenting his research on the unique properties of places like Wolf's Point. He had envisioned a network of small defensive listening posts, an invisible shield to protect the coast. But his superiors, the men he contemptuously referred to only as the vultures, saw something else. They saw a tool for tracking and targeting, a way to turn his shield into a sword. "They want to hunt with it." Samuel wrote his script, growing sharp and angry. "I gave them the means to hear a whisper a league away, and they only want to use it to aim a cannon. They speak of deterrence, but their eyes gleam with the promise of aggression. They cannot see the beauty in listening. They only see the utility in killing." Disgusted, he had taken an early discharge, bearing his research and dedicating his life to building his creation in secret on his own terms. He had built his station not for a government or a military, but for the principle of the silent watch itself. He wanted to listen to understand, to protect, not to attack. He was a guardian, not a hunter. As Nathan read the words, the phrase from the will echoed in his mind with thunderous clarity. He finally understood. This was the silent watch his grandfather had meant, a lifelong, solitary vigil against the very forces they had both once served. "But where is it?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with wonder. The secret station Nathan gently closed the journal, his mind reeling. The quiet, eccentric old man from his childhood had been a visionary, a genius living in self-imposed exile, guarding a secret that could change the world. He looked at Ranger, who gazed back at him with his steady, knowing eyes. "He trained you for this, didn't he?" Nathan whispered. "He trained you to find someone who would understand." Ranger's ear twitched, his amber eyes holding a wisdom that seemed to transcend his animal nature. Nathan picked up the journal again, turning to the final few pages. The narrative prose stopped abruptly. It was replaced by something starkly familiar, a language he understood as well as English. The pages were filled with lines of numbers, letters, and naval abbreviations. It was a cipher, a standard grid-based naval code he had learned in the training. His mind, long accustomed to the slow rhythm of the tides, sharpened instantly, slipping back into the disciplined focus of his former life. He found a pencil and a spare sheet of paper and began the methodical work of decryption. It was a slow process, a conversation with a ghost, conducted in the arcane language of the military. The decoded message was not a simple set of instructions. It was a series of riddles steeped in naval lore, where the sea breathes out and the stone bows. The spring tide, Nathan realized. The lowest tide of the month when the maximum amount of rock was exposed. At the hour of the dog watch between 16 and 20 hours. Late afternoon. Follow the Kraken's arms to the heart of the trident. He remembered from the earlier journals his grandfather's fanciful name for a unique rock formation on the far side of the point, a series of long, dark kelp beds that looked like tentacles stretching from a central three-pronged rock. The final line of the code was a simple drawing, the profile of the strange brass key with an arrow indicating a twisting motion. Nathan leaned back, the decoded message laid out before him. It was a treasure map, but the treasure wasn't gold. It was a hidden door, a gateway into his grandfather's secret world. He looked at the heavy brass key, its purpose now terrifyingly clear. Then he looked out of the window at the gray, churning sea. The tide was turning. A new sense of purpose filled him, stronger than anything he had felt since his discharge. The silent watch had been passed to him not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. His grandfather had seen something in him, even from a distance, a kindred spirit who understood the value of listening, of standing guard, of protecting without aggression. Ethan watched his father's face, sensing the shift. "Did you figure it out? Where the secret place is?" Nathan nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. He felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. "I think I did, and I think it's time for a new adventure." "What do you say, Sentinel, ready to discover what your great-grandfather was really doing out here?" Ethan's answering grin was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. His posture straightened, mirroring his father's newfound resolve. "Ready," he declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Ranger rose to his feet, his body quivering with anticipation, as if he too understood the significance of the moment. He moved to the door, looking back at them expectantly. Nathan tucked the journal and the brass key safely into his jacket pocket. Then he placed a hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the fragile bones beneath his palm, the precious life entrusted to his care. In that touch was a promise to protect, to guide, to stand watch over this child, just as surely as he would guard the secret they were about to uncover. Together, the three sentinels of Wolf's Point prepared to step into a legacy hidden beneath the waves, a silent watch that had endured for decades and would now continue through them. The adventure, Nathan knew, was just beginning. And for the first time since he had arrived at this desolate rock, he felt not just purpose, but something far more precious: belonging. Waiting became a new kind of watch. With the decoded message from his grandfather's journal tucked safely away, their days were now ruled by a single purpose. Nathan consulted Samuel's meticulous tide charts, cross-referencing them with the small almanac he had brought with him. He watched the moon wax and wane, a sliver of silver growing into a full, brilliant disk that cast a shimmering path across the water. The spring tide was 3 days away. During that time, an electric tension settled over Wolf's Point. It was a shared anticipation, a silent understanding that pulsed between man, boy, and dog. Ranger seemed to sense the shift. He was even more attentive than usual, his amber eyes often fixed on Nathan, his head cocked as if waiting for a command that had been encoded in his very being. They would make their daily patrols, but now their gazes lingered on the far side of the point, on the jagged formation of rocks that Samuel had named the Trident. Just as they finished breakfast on the third day, Nathan's satellite phone, normally used only for weekly check-ins, With Mrs. Henderson buzzed with an incoming call, the screen showed a number he didn't recognize. A sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck as he answered. Nathan Carter. Cousin Vincent's voice, smooth and artificially cheerful, filled the small kitchen. I've been trying to reach you for days. How's life on that miserable rock treating you? Nathan's jaw tightened. We're doing fine. What do you want, Vincent? A short laugh, hollow and forced. Always straight to business, aren't you? Well, as it happens, I've been going through some of Grandpa Samuel's old papers, and I've found something rather interesting. Something I think might concern that worthless inheritance of yours. Nathan's gaze met Ethan's across the table. His son's expression had darkened at the mention of Vincent, whom he had met only at Lisa's funeral and taken an instant dislike to. What kind of something? The kind that might be worth a lot of money to the right people. Vincent's voice dropped, taking on a confidential tone. Listen, I've got some associates who are very interested in discussing possibilities. We're on our way to see you, actually. Should be there by this afternoon. The call ended before Nathan could protest. He set the phone down slowly, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Vincent had never shown interest in Wolf's Point before. What had changed? What had he found? He remembered the warning in his grandfather's journal about the vultures who wanted to weaponize his research. Was Vincent unwittingly playing into their hands, or was this something else entirely? Whatever it was, the timing couldn't have been worse. Today was the day they were meant to find the entrance to the listening station, the day the spring tide would reveal Samuel's hidden door. Dad Ethan's voice was small and certain. Is Cousin Vincent really coming here? Nathan nodded, his mind racing through options. It looks that way, buddy. I don't like him, Ethan said flatly. He's mean and he smells weird. Despite the gravity of the situation, Nathan couldn't suppress a small smile. That's the clone kiddo. Cost more than our truck. He stood, decision made. We need to move up our timeline. Get your rain jacket and boots. We're going exploring now. Ranger, sensing the urgency, was already at the door, his body tense with anticipation. The spring tide wouldn't reach its lowest point until late afternoon, but they could at least scout the location, prepare for what was to come. And with Vincent arriving, they needed to know exactly what they were dealing with and what they might need to protect. As they made their way around the perimeter of the point toward the trident, Nathan caught sight of something in the distance, a small dark shape moving across the horizon. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a pair of compact binoculars and focused on the object. It was a boat larger than the fishing vessels that occasionally passed by, sleeker and more expensive looking. Even at this distance, he could make out the distinctive lines of a luxury yacht. Vincent was coming, and he wasn't coming alone. Whatever was hidden beneath Wolf's Point, they needed to find it now. The yacht glided through the calm waters toward Wolf's Point, its pristine white hull a stark intrusion against the rugged landscape. Standing at the helm was Vincent, dressed in an expensive waterproof jacket that looked like it had never been exposed to so much as a drizzle. His face was set in a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, which darted nervously between the navigation equipment and the approaching rock. Beside him stood two men who were clearly not sailors. The first was Kevin, short and wiry, with restless movements and a permanent, anxious expression. The second, Mark, loomed like a mountain, silent, broad-shouldered, with eyes that assessed everything with cold calculation. As they rounded the final outcropping and Wolf's Point came into full view, Vincent let out a triumphant laugh. The dilapidated house on the top looked as pathetic as ever against the vast gray sky. There it is, the kingdom of King Nothing. From their vantage point on the western side of the point, Nathan, Ethan, and Ranger watched the approaching vessel with grim attention. The yacht's gleaming luxury was jarring against the primal simplicity of their granite home, an unwelcome reminder of the world they had temporarily escaped. Nathan tracked the boat through his binoculars, counting the figures on deck. 3 men, Vincent plus 2 unknowns. The spring tide was pulling back rapidly, exposing more of the jagged shoreline with each passing minute. But they still had hours before it would reach its lowest point, revealing what he hoped was the entrance to the listening station. We need to deal with them first, Ethan. These aren't friendly visitors. Ethan's young face hardened with resolve beyond his years. What's the plan, Dad? Nathan considered their options, weighing them against his military training. Direct confrontation was risky. With unknown players, avoidance was impossible on the small rock. That left management controlling the encounter on their terms. We'll meet them at the landing. Be polite, find out what they want, but say nothing about what we've found. Keep Ranger close to you at all times. Nathan felt the familiar cold focus settle over him, the mental state that had carried him through countless operations. This wasn't a combat zone, but the stakes felt just as high. Whatever his grandfather had built here needed protection, not just from the elements, but from human predators as well. They made their way back around the point, reaching the small stone landing just as Vincent was maneuvering the yacht into the sheltered cove. The luxury vessel was clearly not designed for such close quarters navigation. Vincent's inexperience showed in his jerky movements at the controls. After several clumsy attempts, he finally dropped anchor a safe distance from shore and lowered a small motorized tender from the yacht's stern. Vincent, Kevin, and Mark boarded the tender and motored toward the landing. Vincent's expensive deck shoes slipped on the wet stone as he stepped ashore, nearly sending him sprawling. His face flushed with embarrassment before he forced his features into an artificial smile. "Othin cousin, what a pleasure to see you thriving in this rustic setting." His eyes flicked to Ethan and Ranger, who stood slightly behind Nathan, the boy's hand resting protectively on the dog's back. "And little Ethan too. My, you've grown. And is this the famous canine inheritance?" Nathan maintained his position, forcing Vincent and his companions to trudge up the slippery incline toward them. Ranger emitted a low, continuous growl, his amber eyes fixed on the approaching men. "You should have called ahead, Vincent. We don't get many visitors out here." Vincent's smile tightened a fraction. "I did call not 2 hours ago. Surely you remember our charming chat?" He gestured to his companions. "Allow me to introduce my associates. This is Kevin Merrill, my financial advisor, and Mark Denton, my security consultant. Given the remote location, one can't be too careful these days." The smaller man, Kevin, gave a nervous nod, his eyes darting around the rocky landscape as if expecting hidden dangers. Mark merely grunted, his cold gaze assessing Nathan with professional interest, lingering briefly on the way he stood balanced, ready, a posture that silently communicated military training. "What brings you all the way out here, Vincent?" Nathan kept his tone neutral, but his eyes never left his cousin's face. "Last I checked, you weren't exactly enamored with Grandpa Samuel's worthless rock." Vincent's smile faltered for an instant before returning brighter and more artificial than before. "Business, I'm afraid. Rather unexpected business at that. Perhaps we could discuss it somewhere less exposed." He glanced meaningfully at the house perched above them. Nathan weighed his options. Refusing would only heighten suspicion, and keeping Vincent where he could see him was better than letting him wander the point unsupervised. "Follow me." The climb to the house was awkward and silent. Vincent struggled in his impractical footwear while Kevin wheezed from the exertion. Only Mark seemed unaffected, moving with surprising agility for his size. Ranger kept himself between the visitors and Ethan. His hackles raised, his growl a continuous warning. Inside the small main room of the house, Vincent made a show of looking around, nodding with exaggerated approval at the repairs Nathan had made. "Very impressive, cousin. You've made this place almost habitable. Amazing what a little elbow grease can accomplish." Nathan remained standing, positioning himself between the visitors and the stone hearth with its hidden compartment. "Get to the point, Vincent. Why are you here?" Vincent's facade of geniality cracked, revealing a flash of the desperation beneath. He sighed dramatically, dropping into one of the refurbished chairs without invitation. "Since you insist on cutting straight to business, I've been reviewing Grandpa's financial records. Had a team of forensic accountants go through everything with a fine-tooth comb." And Nathan crossed his arms, watching as Kevin nervously fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket while Mark positioned himself near the door, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes constantly moving. "And I found something fascinating." Vincent leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Over the last 30 years of his life, our dear grandfather funneled millions, yes, millions, into this godforsaken rock. Specialized marine engineering firms, industrial-grade materials, custom electronics. A veritable fortune all invested here." His eyes gleamed with naked greed. "So you see, cousin, I'm not here for the rock. I'm here for whatever is on, or should I say in the rock, that was worth all that money." Nathan kept his face carefully neutral, though his mind raced. Vincent had discovered part of the truth, but not all of it. Not the true purpose of Samuel's creation. He's been dead for months. If there was anything valuable here, don't you think I would have found it by now? Vincent's laugh was sharp and unconvincing. Perhaps you have. Perhaps you're just sitting on it, trying to figure out how to cash in. I wouldn't blame you, not with a kid to support on a veteran's pension. His gaze shifted to Ethan, who stood silently by the window, Ranger at his side. But here's the thing, Nathan. Whatever technology Grandpa built here, it rightfully belongs to the family, the whole family. I'm willing to be generous about profit sharing. Nathan's eyes narrowed. There's nothing here but what you see, Vincent. A house, some rocks, and a lot of ocean. If Grandpa spent money here, it was probably lost to storms and salt years ago. Vincent's artificial smile vanished completely, replaced by a cold, desperate intensity that was far more genuine. I don't believe you. His voice hardened. And I don't have time for games. For the first time, Kevin spoke up, his voice thin and reedy with anxiety. Show him, Vince. Just show him. Vincent shot his associate an irritated glance before reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a folded document and tossed it onto the rough wooden table between them. These are excerpts from Grandpa's Navy records. Took some doing to get them, had to call in favors from some former clients with government connections. He wasn't just some eccentric retiree, Nathan. He was a senior acoustic engineer, working on classified naval surveillance systems. Nathan didn't need to look at the document to know it was true, but he forced himself to pick it up and scan it casually as if this was new information. So he built sonar systems. That doesn't mean there's hidden treasure on Wolf's Point. Vincent's expression shifted, a calculated blend of threat and persuasion. I'm in trouble, Nathan. His voice dropped, almost confessional. Serious trouble. The investment firm fired me 6 months ago, improper use of client funds. His laugh was hollow. My wife is threatening divorce if I don't pay off some gambling debts. Big ones, to people you don't want to owe money to. His eyes hardened. I need this. Whatever's here, I need it. The naked desperation in Vincent's voice added a new dimension to the threat he posed. A greedy man might be predictable, but a desperate one was dangerous in unpredictable ways. Nathan thought of the spring tide still hours from its lowest point and of the brass key hidden in his pocket. He needed time. Even if there was something here once Vincent, it's probably long gone. Grandpa's been dead for months, and he was reclusive for years before that. Whatever he built could be rusted away, buried under a rock slide, or washed out to sea. Vincent's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then you won't mind if we look around. My associates and I will just take a tour of the property. He gestured vaguely toward the rocky expanse outside. Ranger's growl deepened as if he understood the implication of Vincent's words. Ethan moved closer to his father, his young face serious. Dad showed me a really cool tide pool yesterday. It has sea stars and anemones and everything. His voice was carefully casual, but his eyes conveyed a silent message. Take them away from the trident. Nathan caught his son's meaning immediately and felt a surge of pride at the boy's quick thinking. I can show you around, Vincent, but I'm warning you there's nothing here but rocks and seagulls. Vincent stood, straightening his expensive jacket with a sharp tug. We'll see about that, cousin. Lead the way. For the next hour, Nathan led Vincent and his associates on a carefully orchestrated tour of Wolf's Point, deliberately avoiding the far side where the trident formation waited for the spring tide. He showed them the small garden he'd started, the renovated boathouse, and the higher viewpoints where Samuel had installed crude weather monitoring equipment. All the while, he kept a watchful eye on Mark, whose professional assessment of the terrain hadn't stopped since they'd arrived. Kevin, increasingly miserable in the salt air and uneven footing, finally spoke up, his voice whiny with discomfort. This is pointless, Vince. If there was anything valuable, it would be inside the house, not out here on these godforsaken rocks. Vincent shot him a withering glance, but nodded reluctantly. Perhaps you're right. Let's head back and take a more thorough look at the house. The words sent a chill through Nathan. The hidden compartment, the journal, the brass key, all were still concealed, but a determined search would uncover them quickly. He needed a diversion, something to buy time until the spring tide revealed the true entrance, where he could assess the listening station and determine exactly what needed protection. As they made their way back toward the house, Ethan suddenly stopped, pointing toward the horizon. Dad looked storm clouds. All eyes turned seaward. Sure enough, a dark line had appeared on the western horizon, an ominous wall of deep purple-gray that marked an approaching weather system. The air pressure had subtly shifted, carrying the metallic tang that preceded a serious storm. Ranger's ears pricked forward, his posture alert. He made a soft, whining sound, nudging Nathan's hand with his nose. The dog's instincts for weather changes were uncanny, another skill Samuel had undoubtedly trained into him. Vincent squinted at the distant clouds, his expression dismissive. A little rain won't hurt us. We've got plenty of time before that reaches us. As if in direct contradiction to his words, the satellite phone in Nathan's pocket buzzed. He pulled it out, noting Vincent's sudden interest in the device. It's the automated weather alert system. His voice grew serious as he read the message. Category 3 storm approaching rapidly. Unusual speed of movement. Expected landfall in 3 to 4 hours. Vincent's face paled slightly. 3 hours is plenty of time. The yacht can outrun it easily. Kevin's nervous laugh held an edge of hysteria. Unless you've suddenly become a master sailor in the last week, Vince, there's no way you're navigating those channels in deteriorating conditions. His eyes darted to Mark, seeking confirmation. Right? The big man nodded grimly, speaking for the first time. His voice was surprisingly soft for his size, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone used to assessing threats. Weather systems moving too fast. Barometric pressures dropping like a stone. He jerked his chin toward the yacht. That pretty toy's not made for rough seas. We try to outrun it. We'll end up on the rocks 5 miles from here. Vincent's face contorted with frustration. So what are you saying? We're stuck here. Nathan pocketed the satellite phone, his decision made. You can secure your yacht more deeply in the cove. It should weather the storm there. The house has stood through worse than this. It's not comfortable, but it's solid. Vincent glared at him, suspicion clear in his eyes. How convenient. A storm traps us here just when we start asking difficult questions. Nathan met his gaze steadily. I don't control the weather, Vincent, but I do know these waters. That storm's no joke. You need to secure your vessel now, or you'll lose it. The urgency in his voice finally penetrated Vincent's suspicion. With a curt nod to Mark, the two men headed back down toward the landing to move the yacht deeper into the sheltered cove. Kevin remained behind, shifting nervously from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable at being left alone with Ethan, and the continuously growling Ranger. As soon as Vincent was out of earshot, Ethan turned to his father, his voice low and urgent. Dad, we have to check the Trident now. The tide's almost at its lowest point, and when the storm hits... Nathan nodded, his mind racing through their options. If his grandfather's hidden entrance was revealed by the spring tide, the approaching storm could damage it, or worse, expose it to Vincent and his associates. They needed to find it first to understand exactly what they were protecting. Kevin cleared his throat awkwardly. Should I go help them? His voice quavered with transparent desire to be anywhere but alone with Nathan. You'll just get in their way. Nathan's tone was neutral but firm. Wait here, we'll be right back. We need to secure some equipment before the storm hits. Before Kevin could protest, Ethan, and Ranger were moving swiftly across the rocky landscape toward the far side of the point. The wind was picking up now, carrying the first cold drops of rain. The storm was approaching faster than predicted, the dark line on the horizon visibly closer. They reached the Trident formation just as the spring tide hit its lowest point. The sea had pulled back dramatically, exposing sections of the shoreline that were normally submerged under several feet of water. The arms of the Kraken, long beds of dark kelp, lay exposed on the wet stone, pointing like natural arrows toward the central, three-pronged rock formation. Nathan crouched down, examining the base of the central spire where the kelp beds converged. Ranger pushed past him, his nose to the stone moving with purpose. The dog stopped at a section of rock that looked identical to every other part of the formation, a place completely draped in thick, wet kelp. Dad, look. Ethan pointed excitedly to where Ranger was now pawing at the kelp-covered rock. Nathan moved quickly to the spot, pulling aside the heavy, slippery strands of seaweed. The rock beneath was dark and slimy to the touch. He ran his hands over the surface, feeling for any imperfection, any crack or seam. Nothing. Ranger nudged a specific spot with his nose, right at waist height. Nathan focused his attention there, wiping away the slime and sea moss. And then he saw it, not a keyhole, not a button, not a handle, but a perfectly circular indentation no bigger than a coin, with a complex gear-like pattern cut into its center. It was so seamlessly integrated into the rock face that it was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. His heart pounded against his ribs. He took the heavy brass key from his pocket. Even in the dim light of the approaching storm, He could see that the intricate notches and grooves on the end of the key were a perfect match for the pattern in the rock. It was the work of a master craftsman, a piece of precision engineering hidden in plain sight. With a slightly trembling hand, he inserted the key into the slot. It slid in with a smooth, satisfying click, fitting so perfectly there was no play at all. He took a deep breath, gripped the T-shaped handle with both hands, and turned it clockwise just as the drawing in the journal had indicated. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low, deep grinding sound vibrated through the soles of his boots, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the stone. A thin, perfectly straight line appeared in the rock face, tracing the outline of a large rectangular door. The sound grew louder, the groan of immense weight being moved by a powerful hidden mechanism. Slowly, ponderously, an entire section of the cliff face began to recede into the darkness, within a multi-ton slab of solid granite sliding inward like the door of a bank vault. The opening revealed a dark square tunnel leading into absolute blackness. A cool, dry, still air flowed out carrying the faint scent of ozone and dormant machinery. We found it. Dad Ethan's voice was hushed with awe. Great-grandpa's secret place. Before Nathan could respond, a voice cut through the rising wind. Well, 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 what have we here? Vincent stood 20 feet away, his expensive jacket whipping in the strengthening gusts, his face a mask of triumphant greed. Behind him loomed the silent figure of Mark, his cold eyes taking in every detail of the stone door and the dark passage beyond. Nathan pushed Ethan behind him protectively, his body tensing for conflict. Ranger's growl deepened to a threatening rumble. His hackles raised, his body coiled to spring. Vincent took a step forward, his movements cautious on the slick stone. So this is what the old man was hiding. His voice carried a mixture of awe and avarice. A secret bunker built right into the rock. Ingenious. The distant boom of thunder punctuated his words, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall in earnest. The storm was upon them, much faster than predicted. The wind howled around the jagged rocks, sending spray from the increasingly choppy waves high into the air. Time to see what's inside, cousin. Vincent's eyes gleamed with feverish intensity. Mark, ensure our friend here doesn't get any heroic ideas. The big man moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Nathan and any possible escape route. His hand slipped inside his jacket, the implicit threat clear. Nathan's mind raced, assessing options, angles, the rising wind, the slippery footing, all potential factors in a confrontation. But Ethan's presence behind him changed the calculus entirely. He couldn't risk his son's safety, not for any secret, no matter how important. Vincent, this isn't what you think. We don't know what's in there, or if it's even stable after all these years. Vincent's laugh was swallowed by another crack of thunder. Save it, Nathan. I've come too far to turn back now. He gestured toward the dark opening. After you, cousin, I insist. With Ranger at his side and Ethan close behind him, Nathan had no choice but to step into the tunnel. The beam of Vincent's flashlight played over the smooth walls, which seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The tunnel ran straight for about 50 feet before ending at a heavy sealed metal door, like one found on a naval vessel. Impressive, Vincent murmured, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Your grandfather didn't cut corners, did he? Nathan remained silent, weighing his options. The brass key was still in the outside lock. The stone door still open to the rapidly deteriorating weather. If the storm's surge rose high enough, it could flood the tunnel. But closing it would trap them inside with Vincent and Mark, neither of whom could be trusted. The choice was made for him when a massive wave, driven by the intensifying storm, crashed against the rocks outside, sending a sheet of water cascading into the tunnel entrance. Mark, the closest to the opening, shouted in surprise as the cold spray hit him. Close it! Vincent yelled, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Close the damn door. Nathan hesitated for a crucial second, then made his decision. He rushed back to the entrance, Ranger at his heels, and reached for the brass key. With a powerful twist, he reversed the mechanism. The grinding sound began again, and the massive stone slab started to slide back into place. He yanked the key free, just as the gap became too narrow, the ancient mechanism completing its work with a final resonant thud that sealed them off from the raging storm. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the storm's fury had been. The only sounds were their breathing and the faint, distant hum of machinery coming from somewhere beyond the metal door at the tunnel's end. Well, Vincent said, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet. No going back now. He aimed his flashlight at the metal door. Shall we see what Grandpa was hiding? Nathan stepped forward, examining the locking mechanism, a large circular wheel. His military training took over, pushing aside personal concerns. He put his hands on the wheel and turned. Decades of disuse had done nothing to impede its function. It spun smoothly, silently, and the heavy door swung inward with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. He stepped through the doorway and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. He was standing on a raised metal catwalk overlooking a cavernous, circular chamber. The room was carved directly from the living granite of the point, but the space was filled with the quiet, imposing presence of advanced technology. Banks of servers with blinking standby lights lined one wall. A series of complex control panels and consoles formed a semicircle in the center of the room. Dominating the far wall was a massive curved screen, currently dark and silent. The air was cool and circulated by a faint, almost inaudible hum. Everything was spotlessly clean, free of dust or corrosion preserved in this hermetically sealed tomb. It was a time capsule from the Cold War, yet it felt futuristic. Holy! Vincent's voice trailed off as he stepped onto the catwalk beside Nathan, his eyes wide with shock. This is incredible. What the hell is it? Nathan descended the metal steps to the main floor, his boots clanging softly in the vast space. He approached the central console, running a hand over its cool, smooth surface. Based on the journals, it's an acoustic surveillance station. Grandpa Samuel discovered that the unique geology of Wolf's Point naturally amplifies and focuses sound waves from the deep ocean. He built this place to listen. Vincent followed him down, his earlier arrogance temporarily subdued by genuine awe. His fingers hovered over the controls, not quite touching them. Listen to whatever thing. Nathan gestured to the massive dark screen. Ships, submarines, seismic activity, marine life. If it makes a sound in the deep water channel offshore, this station can hear it. Ethan moved around the chamber with childlike wonder, taking in the blinking lights and humming machinery. It's like a secret superhero base. His voice echoed in the cavernous space. Mark remained on the catwalk, his professional assessment now focused on the technology before him. This isn't just old government surplus, he said quietly. This is custom-built, state-of-the-art stuff, even by today's standards. His eyes narrowed. Your grandfather was either a genius or had help from people with very deep pockets. Vincent's initial awe was rapidly being replaced by calculation. He circled the central console, his greedy gaze taking in every detail. Do you have any idea what this is worth, the patents alone? He pulled out his satellite phone only to curse when he saw there was no signal. We need to contact my investors immediately. They'll want to see this in person. A chill ran through Nathan that had nothing to do with the station's cool air. Investors. What investors? Vincent waved a dismissive hand. Some very interested foreign parties who appreciate unique American engineering. No question asked, cash up front. His smile didn't reach his eyes. They're very eager to see what's for sale. The words hit Nathan with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about greed anymore. Vincent, in his blind, stupid avarice, was trying to sell a vital piece of national defense technology to an unknown foreign power. He was a vulture, just as his grandfather had written, but he was also a traitor. You can't be serious, Vincent. This is military technology. Selling it to foreign interests would be treason. Nathan's voice was deadly calm, the tone he used when a situation was about to go critical. The temperature in the station seemed to drop. Nathan's posture changed, the weary homesteader vanishing, replaced by the cold, hard lines of the SEAL operator. Ranger sensed the shift instantly. His growl deepened, escalating into a sound that was no longer a warning, but a promise. Vincent took an involuntary step backward, finally recognizing the danger in his cousin's stance. Now let's not get dramatic. This is a family asset, not government property. The old man built it with his own money on his own land. His nervous laugh betrayed his uncertainty. Besides, it's just a listening post. It's not like we're selling missile codes. Mark's voice cut through the tension, all pretense of servility gone from his tone. This isn't just a listening post. His gaze swept over the technology with new appreciation. This is a SOSUS node sound surveillance system. During the Cold War, the Navy laid underwater hydrophone arrays along both coasts to track Soviet submarines. He pointed to one of the server banks. But this is something else. It's a passive acoustic lens using the natural geology as an amplifier. No underwater hardware to maintain or detect, completely undetectable itself. His cold eyes met Nathan's. Your grandfather built something revolutionary here. Vincent stared at his hired muscle with surprise. How the hell do you know all this? Mark's smile was thin and humorless. I wasn't always private security. He turned to Nathan. Your cousin doesn't understand what he's selling, but his investors will. This technology could blind our entire coastal defense system if it fell into the wrong hands. The massive screen suddenly flickered to life. Lines of diagnostic text scrolling rapidly across its surface in a green phosphorescent script. A wireframe map of the local coastline appeared, then a series of concentric circles expanded from a point marked Wolf's Point. Dad Ethan called from one of the auxiliary consoles, his hands hovering over a keyboard. I think I turned it on. The text and lines vanished, replaced by an explosion of light and color. The screen was no longer a screen. It was a window into a world of pure sound. The deep, silent black of the ocean was rendered as a living tapestry of noise. The steady, low-frequency drone of a distant cargo ship was a slow-moving river of deep purple. A pod of dolphins communicating a few miles away appeared as a series of flashing electric blue streaks. The biological noise of a shrimp bed was a constant shimmering cloud of pale green static. Nathan stared, utterly mesmerized. He was seeing the symphony his grandfather had written about a world more vibrant, more complex, and more alive than he could have ever imagined. He could see the currents, feel the tectonic hum of the earth, and witness the secret conversations of the deep. It was beautiful and terrifying and overwhelmingly powerful. But it was the small, dense signature moving slowly but deliberately toward Wolf's Point that drew his immediate attention. A submarine small, probably a submersible or a mini-sub, using the storm's roar as a perfect shield to mask its approach. Vincent's investors were arriving for their purchase. A new alert flashed on one of the smaller screens, a structural integrity warning. The storm was hammering the point with unprecedented force, causing dangerous vibrations within the granite structure itself. The house above would be the most vulnerable point, likely already suffering significant damage. The dual threat slammed into Nathan with the force of a physical blow. Above, trapped in a rapidly disintegrating house, was Kevin alone and unaware of the danger. Below, closing in on their position, was a foreign submarine intent on acquiring technology that could compromise national security. And the entire structure housing them was under immense physical stress from the storm. He was trapped between the wrath of the Atlantic, the greed of his cousin, and the arrival of a predator from the deep. Vincent moved to his side, his face pale, as he too recognized the submarine signature on the screen. My buyers are early. His voice held a note of panic. The storm must have pushed up their timeline. Mark stepped forward, his expression hardening as he assessed the situation. Those aren't ordinary investors, Carter. That's a military-grade submersible with a diplomatic cover. His eyes narrowed. Russian or Chinese, most likely. Vincent's face drained of color. They said they represented a private consortium. Mark's laugh was cold and without humor. There's no such thing as a private consortium when it comes to technology like this. You've been played, Vincent, and you've played right into their hands. Ranger's ears suddenly pricked forward, and he let out a high-pitched whine, not a sound of aggression but of warning. He looked up at the ceiling, then back at Nathan, his amber eyes conveying a clear message. The dog's warning was confirmed a moment later when a section of the upper catwalk groaned a hairline crack, appearing in the stone wall behind it. The entire station shuddered as a particularly violent wave hammered the point above them. We need to evacuate, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. The storm's compromising the structural integrity of the station. And go where Vincent gestured wildly toward the tunnel. Back into that hurricane, another alert flashed on the screen, this one showing a real-time topographical map of Wolf's Point. A section of the northern face, weakened by decades of erosion, was beginning to give way under the storm's onslaught. We have no choice, Nathan insisted. This entire chamber could collapse if that section goes. As if to punctuate his words, a deep, resonant cracking sound echoed through the station, and a shower of stone dust rained down from the ceiling. Ranger barked sharply, pushing Ethan toward the metal door with his body. Vincent looked from the approaching submarine signature on the screen to the cracking ceiling, indecision and panic warring on his face. If we leave, they'll take everything. All this technology, all this potential wealth. His voice cracked with desperation. I need this, Nathan. You don't understand how badly I need this. Nathan grabbed his cousin's arm, forcing Vincent to meet his gaze. There won't be anything left to take if we're crushed under tons of rock. We need to go now. Ethan, who had been quietly examining one of the auxiliary consoles, suddenly called out, his voice cutting through the tension. Dad, great-grandpa built a defense system. All eyes turned to the boy, who was pointing excitedly at a schematic on a small screen. It's like in the journal, a way to protect the station. It says it can emit a focused sound pulse powerful enough to disable electronic systems within a half-mile radius. His young face was alight with discovery. We can stop the submarine. Nathan quickly moved to his son's side, examining the system Ethan had found. It was ingenious, a weaponized version of the station's acoustic capabilities designed to create a targeted electromagnetic pulse using sound waves as the delivery mechanism. But there was a catch. The activation controls are on the exterior of the point, he realized reading the schematic. They have to be manually triggered from outside, which means going back into the storm, Mark concluded grimly. He assessed Nathan with newfound respect. Your grandfather thought of everything. A final fail-safe that can only be activated by someone willing to risk their life to protect this place. The chamber shuddered again as another powerful wave struck the point. Time was running out. They needed to make a decision, try to weather the storm in the increasingly unstable station, or brave the hurricane outside to activate the defense system and prevent the submarine from reaching them. Before Nathan could speak, Vincent made a desperate lunge toward the main console, his intentions clear in his wild eyes. If he couldn't have the technology, he would destroy it rather than let it slip from his grasp. Mark moved with surprising speed for his size, intercepting Vincent before he could reach the controls. The two men grappled briefly before Mark subdued him with practiced efficiency. We don't have time for this. Nathan snapped, his mind already formulating the plan. Mark, get Vincent and Kevin back to the house. It's on higher ground and should withstand the storm better than this chamber. Take Ranger with you. He knows the safest paths. The big man nodded, his respect for Nathan's authority evident in his immediate acceptance of the orders. What about you and the boy? Nathan looked at Ethan, seeing not just his son, but a partner in this unexpected mission. We're going to stop that submarine. Dad, I'm coming with you, Ethan insisted, his young face set with determination beyond his years. Great-grandpa built this for us to protect. We're the sentinels now. Remember? The simple courage in his son's words struck Nathan to his core. In this moment of crisis, Ethan wasn't a frightened child, but a worthy inheritor of Samuel Carter's legacy, a guardian willing to stand watch against the approaching threat. Nathan knelt down to his son's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. I can't keep you safe out there, buddy. The storm's too dangerous. Ethan's chin lifted, his eyes so like his mother's, steady and resolute. You always say that sometimes being brave means being scared, but doing the right thing anyway. I'm scared, Dad, but I still want to help. In that moment, Nathan saw not just the boy Ethan was, but the man he would become, a man of principle, courage, and unwavering determination. A man who understood the value of a silent watch. Together then, he said softly, Sentinels of Wolf's Point. As Mark escorted a subdued Vincent toward the exit, Ranger hesitated, torn between following orders and staying with Ethan. The dog looked back at them, a low whine of distress in his throat. Go with them, boy, Nathan commanded, his voice firm but gentle. We'll be right behind you. With visible reluctance, Ranger padded after Mark and Vincent, his head turning back one last time before disappearing through the metal door. Nathan quickly gathered what they would need: waterproof flashlights, a length of rope to secure themselves together, and the schematics showing the location of the defense system controls. The station groaned again, another crack appearing in the ceiling as the storm continued its relentless assault on Wolf's Point. Ready, he asked Ethan, tying the rope securely around both their waists. The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Ready, Dad. Together they headed for the exit toward the howling maelstrom that awaited them outside and the approaching threat that only they could stop. The silent watch that Samuel Carter had maintained for decades now fell to them, A father and son united in purpose, the newest guardians of a legacy hidden beneath the waves. The metal door of the station slammed shut behind them with a resonant clang, sealing off the relative safety of Samuel's underground marvel. Nathan and Ethan stood in the narrow tunnel, the beams of their flashlights barely penetrating the thick darkness. The storm's fury, momentarily muted by the heavy stone walls, now reached them as a constant, ominous vibration, the very bedrock of Wolf's Point trembling under the Atlantic's assault. Nathan checked the rope binding him to his son once more, tightening the knots with practiced precision. The schematic he'd found showed the defense system controls located at the highest point of the rock, a cruel irony that the safeguard designed to protect the station required exposing oneself to the full violence of the elements. The greatest danger isn't the storm itself, Ethan. It's the unpredictable waves if we time it wrong. His voice trailed off, unwilling to verbalize the worst-case scenario to his 10-year-old son. Ethan's small hand found his father's in the darkness, squeezing with surprising strength. We won't time it wrong. We're Carters, and Great-Grandpa chose us as the guardians. His faith burned with the unshakable certainty of childhood. Nathan felt a surge of both pride and fear. In a perfect world, his son would never have to face such dangers, never have to shoulder such responsibilities. But this wasn't a perfect world. It was a world where sometimes the only people standing between safety and catastrophe were those willing to step into the storm. "Let's go, Sentinel," he said softly, using the title Ethan had claimed for himself. They moved toward the entrance, the brass key heavy in Nathan's pocket. As they approached the massive stone door, they could hear the storm more clearly now, a howling, shrieking cacophony punctuated by the crash of waves and the crack of thunder. Nathan inserted the key into the hidden lock and turned it, bracing himself for what was to come. The grinding mechanism engaged, and the stone slab began to slide outward. Immediately, a blast of wind and icy spray hit them with physical force, nearly knocking Ethan off his feet. Nathan grabbed his son, pulling him close as the full fury of the Category 3 hurricane revealed itself. The world outside was chaos incarnate. The sky had vanished, replaced by swirling masses of black cloud illuminated by jagged spears of lightning. The sea had risen dramatically, massive waves crashing over the lower sections of Wolf's Point, with explosive force sending plumes of white spray 50 feet into the air. The wind tore at them with malevolent fingers, threatening to rip them from the relative safety of the tunnel entrance. For a moment, Nathan's resolve faltered. To venture out into this maelstrom with his son seemed not brave, but foolhardy, perhaps even suicidal. But then he remembered the submarine signature on the station's display closing in on their position. If those foreign operatives acquired Samuel's technology, the consequences would extend far beyond one family on a lonely rock. They would have to navigate nearly 300 yards of exposed rock, climbing to the summit where the manual defense controls waited. Every step would be treacherous, every moment an exercise in calculated risk. They had one advantage: Nathan's military training had included operations in extreme weather conditions. He knew how to read the patterns, how to time their movements between the worst gusts and waves. "We move fast, stay low, and use the rock formations for cover," he shouted over the storm's roar. "When I squeeze your hand twice, drop. Flat immediately. That means a big wave is coming." Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined in the sporadic flashes of lightning. His rain jacket whipped around his small frame, the hood already sodden with spray despite their brief exposure. Nathan took a deep breath, mentally plotting their route to the summit. "Wait for the next wave to hit, then we go. 3, 2, 1. A massive swell crashed against the rocks below, sending a wall of spray over their position. As it receded, Nathan pulled Ethan forward, and they emerged from the tunnel into the full fury of the storm. The wind hit them like a physical blow, trying to tear them from their precarious footing. They hunched low, using the larger rock formations as windbreaks, moving in short bursts between relatively sheltered positions. The rope between them was their lifeline. More than once, a sudden gust nearly swept Ethan off his feet, only for the tether to hold him steady. Lightning cracked overhead, briefly illuminating their path with stark blue-white clarity. In those flashes, Nathan caught glimpses of the devastation the storm had already wrought. The boathouse was gone, reduced to scattered timbers. Vincent's yacht, despite being anchored in the sheltered cove, was being hammered mercilessly against the rocks, its pristine white hull now scarred and broken. And the house, their refuge for the past weeks, was partially collapsed, its roof torn away, its walls exposed to the elements' fury. They paused in the lee of a large boulder, momentarily sheltered from the worst of the wind. Ethan was shivering now, his lips taking on a bluish tinge despite the exertion. Nathan pulled him close, sharing what body heat he could, just a little further. "Buddy, see that flat rock up there? That's where we need to go." His voice was nearly lost in the storm's roar. Ethan nodded, his eyes following Nathan's pointing finger to a relatively flat plateau near the summit. Through the driving rain, they could just make out the outline of what appeared to be a small metal cabinet, bolted directly to the stone, the external controls for Samuel's defense system. A massive flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that they felt through the soles of their boots. The storm was directly overhead now, its full fury focused on Wolf's Point, as if nature itself was determined to reclaim this human outpost. In that brilliant flash, Nathan caught sight of something that made his blood run cold, a dark shape in the water less than 100 yards offshore. The submarine had surfaced, its conning tower barely visible above the churning waves. It was making its approach, using the storm as cover, confident that no one would be watching the seas in such conditions. They had minutes, not the hours he'd hoped for. "Now, Ethan, we have to move now." Nathan pulled his son forward, abandoning caution for speed. They scrambled across the exposed rock face, the wind tearing at their clothes, the rain lashing their skin like tiny needles. The rope between them went taut repeatedly as one or the other lost their footing on the slick stone, only to be steadied by their connection. They were 20 yards from the control box when Nathan felt a subtle change in the air pressure. A momentary lull in the wind that his combat-trained senses recognized immediately as the harbinger of something worse. He looked seaward, just in time to see it, a rogue wave at least 30 feet high, rising like a liquid mountain from the churning ocean down. Now he yanked Ethan to the ground, wrapping his body around his son's smaller form, one hand desperately grabbing a protruding spur of rock. The rope between them twisted tight around his wrists, cutting off circulation but securing them to their precarious perch. The waves struck with apocalyptic force. One moment they were pressed against the stone, the next they were engulfed in a universe of cold, crushing pressure. The water tried to tear them from the rock, to sweep them into the churning maelstrom below. Nathan's muscles screamed as he held on his fingers, bloodied by the sharp stone, but refusing to yield. For 3 eternal seconds they were underwater, the world reduced to a roaring green darkness. Then the wave receded, leaving them gasping and sputtering, but miraculously still on the rock. Ethan coughed violently, expelling seawater from his lungs. His face was pale with shock and cold, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "Did you see it, Dad? The submarine, it's almost here." Nathan nodded grimly, helping his son to his feet. The rogue wave had nearly taken them, but it had also given them a clear view of their adversary. The submersible was less than 50 yards from Wolf's Point, now its movements deliberate despite the turbulent seas. They covered the remaining distance to the control box with desperate speed, slipping and sliding on the wet rock, but never stopping. The metal cabinet, bolted directly to the stone, was weather-beaten but intact, its surface etched with the same precise engineering notation that had filled Samuel's journals. Nathan fumbled with the latch, his fingers numb with cold and stiff from his death grip on the rock. The cabinet door finally swung open, revealing a deceptively simple interior, a series of switches, a key slot similar to the one that had opened the stone door, and a large red button protected by a clear plastic cover. The schematic had been clear. The system required a specific activation sequence, followed by the insertion and turning of the brass key. Only then would the final activation button become operational. It was a fail-safe designed to prevent accidental triggering, requiring deliberate human intent. Nathan's hands moved across the controls, flipping switches in the precise order detailed in the station documents. Each one lit a small indicator, lamp, green pinpricks of light, incongruous against the storm's dark fury. Ethan pressed close, shielding the open cabinet from the worst of the rain with his body. "Will it really stop the submarine, Dad?" Nathan nodded as he worked his movements, becoming more sure as training and purpose overrode physical discomfort. "If it works like the schematics say, it'll emit a focused sonic pulse that will fry their electronics, engines, navigation, communications. Everything goes dark." He inserted the brass key into the slot, taking a deep breath before the final step. "But we only get one shot if it doesn't work." His son's hand covered his own on the key's small fingers, interlacing with his larger ones. "It'll work. Great-grandpa built it to protect us. We just have to trust him." The simple faith in his son's voice steadied Nathan. Together, they turned the key. The plastic cover over the red button retracted automatically, revealing the final activation control. A small digital display lit up beside it, showing a countdown timer: 30 seconds. Once initiated, they would have half a minute to clear the area before the system discharged. Nathan's finger hovered over the button. Once pressed, there would be no aborting the sequence. "Are you ready to run, Ethan? We'll need to get to shelter before it activates." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were fixed on something beyond Nathan's shoulder. His face paled further. "Dad!" The wave Nathan spun around just in time to see another massive swell rising toward them, this one even larger than the last. There was no time to run, nowhere to go. In a split-second decision, and he slammed his palm down on the red button, then wrapped himself around Ethan, pressing them both into a narrow crevice in the rock face just as the wave struck. The countdown had begun. 29 seconds. 28. 27. The impact of the wave was like being hit by a freight train. It tore at them with mindless violence, trying to pry them from their tenuous shelter. Nathan felt his grip slipping, his muscles failing after too much exertion, too much cold, too much strain. The rope between them snapped taut again as Ethan was momentarily lifted by the current, his small body buffeted like a leaf in a gale. 20 seconds. 19. 18. The wave receded, leaving them battered but still clinging to the rock. Nathan pulled Ethan up, his heart hammering as he saw blood trickling from a cut on his son's forehead. No time to check the wound, they had to move now to find shelter before the defense system activated. "We need to get to the house. It's the only structure left standing," Nathan shouted over the storm, pulling Ethan toward the path leading down from the summit. They scrambled across the slick stone, half running, half sliding down the steep incline. The wind seemed to be fighting them, deliberately changing direction to oppose their movement, driving rain and spray into their faces with blinding force. 10 seconds. 9. 8. They could see the house now, or what remained of it. The roof was gone. One wall had collapsed entirely, but a portion of the structure still stood, offering the only potential shelter on the exposed rock. 5 seconds. 4. They were 20 yards from the house when Nathan realized they weren't going to make it. The defense system was about to discharge, and they were fully exposed on the open rock. In a desperate gamble, he pulled Ethan down into a shallow depression in the stone, covering his son's body with his own. 3, 2, 1. The world went white. There was no sound, at least none that human ears could detect. Instead, there was a sensation, a pressure wave that passed through their bodies like a physical entity, making their bones vibrate and their teeth ache. The air itself seemed to distort, rippling visibly like the surface of a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. For a moment, the storm itself appeared to pause, as if nature was momentarily stunned by this human intrusion into its domain. Then, as quickly as it had come, the effect passed, leaving only the continuing fury of the hurricane. Nathan raised his head cautiously, blinking away rainwater as he scanned their surroundings. Nothing seemed different. The storm still raged, the waves still crashed against the rock. Had it worked, or had Samuel's decades-old defense system failed when they needed it most? The answer came in the form of a sudden listing of the submarine. Through the driving rain, they could see the vessel tilting sharply to one side, its previously purposeful movement replaced by the uncontrolled drift of a dead ship. The sonic pulse had worked, disabling the submersible's electronics just as Samuel had designed it to do. "We did it, Dad." Ethan's voice was hoarse with exhaustion, but triumphant. "We stopped them." Nathan allowed himself a moment of relief before reality reasserted itself. They had neutralized one threat, but the storm remained, as did the very real danger of hypothermia if they didn't find shelter soon. And then there was Vincent, unstable, desperate Vincent, and whatever damage he might be causing back at the station. "Let's get to the house. We need to check on the others, then get back to the station." Nathan pulled Ethan to his feet, supporting his increasingly exhausted son as they made their final push towards shelter. The interior of the damaged house offered little comfort. The wind still howled through the missing roof and collapsed wall, but at least they were partially shielded from the direct force of the rain. Kevin was huddled in a corner, wrapped in a blanket, his face a mask of terror and confusion. Of Vincent, Mark, and Ranger, there was no sign. "Where are the others?" Nathan demanded, helping Ethan to a relatively dry spot and wrapping his own jacket around the shivering boy. Kevin's teeth chattered as he responded. The dog, the dog started acting crazy, scratching at the floor. Then that big guy, Mark, he said something was wrong at the station. They went back, left me here. Nathan's blood ran cold. Ranger's behavior meant only one thing: danger. The Bob made sense something wrong with the station's structural integrity, just as he had warned them about the storm. If Mark and Vincent had returned there, stay with Ethan. Nathan ordered, already moving toward the door. Keep him warm. I need to check the station. Dad? No. Ethan struggled to his feet, swaying with exhaustion. You can't go alone. Nathan knelt before his son, gripping his shoulders firmly. Listen to me, Sentinel. I need you to hold this position. That's an order. His voice softened. I'll come back for you, I promise. The trip back to the station entrance was a nightmare of wind, rain, and treacherous footing. Twice Nathan was nearly swept off the rock by powerful waves, saved only by his combat training and desperate determination. When he finally reached the hidden door, he found it partially open, a sliver of darkness indicating that someone had recently entered and failed to secure it properly. Drawing a deep breath, Nathan slipped through the narrow opening into the relative quiet of the tunnel. The absence of the storm's roar was so sudden it left his ears ringing in the silence. He moved cautiously forward, his waterlogged boots making squelching sounds on the smooth floor. The inner door to the station hung open as well, and as Nathan approached, he could hear voices raised in argument echoing from the chamber beyond. Vincent's high, desperate tones contrasted with Mark's deeper, more controlled voice. Destroy everything before they get here. We can't let them have it. Vincent's voice was edged with hysteria. Think, you idiot. It's over. Your buyers are dead in the water. Mark's response was cold, pragmatic. If you damage this equipment, you're destroying evidence of your own treason. Not a smart move. Nathan stepped through the doorway onto the metal catwalk, taking in the scene below. Vincent stood at the main console, his hands hovering over what appeared to be a shutdown sequence. Mark faced him from several feet away, his posture alert but not overtly threatening. Between them, positioned like a gray and white sentinel, stood Ranger. His hackles raised, his amber eyes never leaving Vincent. The massive screen still displayed the acoustic view of the surrounding ocean, but now it showed the disabled submarine drifting helplessly, carried by the powerful currents toward the distant shoreline. Multiple new contacts had appeared as well, fast-moving vessels approaching from the direction of the mainland, Coast Guard cutters responding to the emergency beacon Nathan had activated before leaving the station. It's over, Vincent, Nathan called from the catwalk, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Help is coming. Don't make this worse than it already is. Vincent's head snapped up, his eyes wild with a dangerous mixture of fear and desperation. His hair was plastered to his forehead with rain and sweat, his expensive clothes torn and sodden. He looked like a man balanced on the knife edge of total breakdown. Worse. How could it possibly be worse? His laugh held an edge of madness. I'm facing treason charges. My career is over. My marriage is finished, and I owe money to people who don't take IOUs. His hand slammed down on the console. This was my last chance, Nathan. My last chance to fix everything. Before Nathan could respond, a deep, ominous rumble shook the station. Fine dust sifted down from the ceiling, and a hairline crack appeared in one wall, spreading like a lightning bolt through the solid rock. The storm's relentless pounding was weakening the structure faster than anticipated. Ranger barked sharply, moving toward the tunnel entrance with urgent purpose. The dog's message was clear: they needed to evacuate now. The structural integrity warning flashed red on multiple screens, accompanied by a piercing alarm. A computerized voice, calm and incongruous amid the growing chaos, announced, "Warning, critical structural failure imminent. Evacuate immediately." "The station is going to collapse," Nathan shouted, descending the stairs rapidly. "We need to get out, all of us." Mark was already moving toward the exit, his professional training overriding any other considerations. Survival first, consequences later. Vincent, however, remained frozen at the console, his eyes fixed on the screens, as if they held some solution to his impossible situation. Another violent tremor shook the chamber, more severe than the last. A section of the catwalk tore free from its moorings, crashing to the floor in a twisted heap of metal. The crack in the wall widened visibly, and the ominous sound of shifting stone echoed through the space. Nathan grabbed Vincent's arm, physically pulling him away from the console. "There's no time. Move for a moment." Vincent resisted, his face contorted, with a complex mixture of emotions, rage, despair, and finally resignation. Then he allowed himself to be led toward the exit, stumbling slightly as another tremor shook the floor beneath them. They had just reached the tunnel entrance when a massive section of the ceiling gave way, tons of granite crashing down onto the central area of the station. The impact sent a shockwave through the remaining structure, knocking them off their feet. Vincent fell awkwardly, crying out in pain as his leg twisted beneath him. The tunnel itself was beginning to collapse as well, the smooth walls cracking under the immense pressures being exerted by the shifting rock above. Mark was already at the outer door, Ranger at his heels, both waiting impatiently for the others to catch up. Nathan hauled Vincent to his feet, supporting his weight as they stumbled forward. Vincent's face was pale with pain, his injured leg barely taking any weight. Their progress was agonizingly slow, the tunnel continuing to deteriorate around them with each passing second. They were halfway to the exit when a particularly violent tremor shook the passage. A large section of the ceiling collapsed directly ahead of them, blocking the tunnel with a pile of rubble that reached nearly to the roof. Ranger and Mark were now cut off on the far side of the blockage. "Find another way out." Mark's voice was barely audible through the barrier of stone. "The dog and I will get help." Nathan stared at the collapsed section, calculating possibilities. There was no way through. The entire passage was effectively sealed. And behind them, the station was continuing to collapse, the destruction moving inexorably in their direction. "We're trapped," Vincent whispered, the last of his bravado evaporating as the reality of their situation sank in. "We're going to die in here." Nathan refused to accept that conclusion. His mind raced through the schematics he'd studied, searching for any alternative exit, any possibility they'd overlooked. Samuel was too thorough an engineer to build a complex like this with only one way out. There had to be an emergency exit, a maintenance tunnel, something. The journal, he realized suddenly. The final pages of the oilcloth-wrapped journal he had found in the hidden compartment, he hadn't finished decoding them. What if they contained information about an alternative exit? Vincent would need you to focus. "Did you bring the journal with you?" "The one from the fireplace." Vincent blinked, momentarily confused by the question, then nodded slowly. "Inside pocket." Why? Nathan helped him sit against the wall of the tunnel, then carefully extracted the journal from Vincent's sodden jacket. The oilcloth had protected it from the worst of the water damage, but the pages were still damp and fragile. Working quickly but carefully, he turned to the final section where the naval cipher continued. The tremors were coming more frequently now, each one dislodging more dust and small stones from the increasingly unstable ceiling. They had minutes at most before the entire tunnel system collapsed. Nathan's eyes raced across the encoded text, his mind translating the cipher with practiced efficiency. Most of it was technical documentation, maintenance schedules, operational parameters. But then, on the final page, he found what he was looking for, a reference to an emergency egress shaft located near the primary power junction. "Where's the power coming from?" he demanded, looking up from the journal. "The tidal generators. Where do they connect to the station?" Vincent stared at him blankly for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "The north wall of the main chamber. There's a heavy door marked primary power. I saw it when we first entered." Nathan helped Vincent to his feet again, and they stumbled back toward the collapsing station. It was a desperate gamble, moving deeper into a failing structure rather than trying to dig through the blockage, but it was their only chance. The main chamber was a scene of devastation. Nearly half the ceiling had collapsed, burying the central console under tons of rock. Sparks flew from damaged electronics, and the once impressive screen was now a shattered ruin. The air was thick with dust, making breathing difficult and visibility poor. They made their way carefully around the perimeter of the chamber, avoiding the areas where the ceiling seemed most unstable. The door Vincent had mentioned was partially obscured by fallen debris, but still accessible. Nathan cleared enough rubble to pull it open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor beyond. Unlike the main chamber, this passageway was purely utilitarian: bare rock walls, reinforced with metal supports, a simple concrete floor, and basic lighting that flickered unreliably as the power systems fluctuated. It sloped upward at a steep angle, heading toward the surface. "Let's go." Nathan helped Vincent into the corridor, supporting him as they began the difficult ascent. The injured man's breathing was labored, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, but he kept moving, driven by the basic human instinct for survival. The passage seemed endless, each step an exercise in pain and determination. Vincent stumbled, repeatedly each time taking longer to regain his feet. The tremors continued, less severe in this section, but still ominous reminders of the ongoing collapse behind them. "I can't," Vincent gasped, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "Just leave me. Save yourself." Nathan crouched beside his cousin, meeting his defeated gaze directly. "No one gets left behind. Not even you. Now get up. We're almost there." Vincent stared at him in disbelief, then gave a short, pained laugh. "Why are you helping me? After what I did?" Nathan pulled him to his feet once more, resuming their painful journey upward. "Because that's what sentinels do. We protect. Even the people who don't deserve it." They had traveled perhaps 200 yards up the sloping passage when Nathan noticed a change in the air, a freshness, a hint of the storm's ozone scent replacing the stale, dusty atmosphere of the tunnel. And then he saw it, a circular metal hatch set into the ceiling of the passage, secured with a simple wheel mechanism similar to the one on the station's inner door. Bracing Vincent against the wall, Nathan reached up and turned the wheel. It moved reluctantly, at first years of disuse making the mechanism stiff, but then it began to spin more freely. With a final twist, the hatch unlocked with a satisfying clunk. Nathan pushed upward, and the hatch swung open, admitting a blast of cold, rain-laden air. The storm was still raging outside, but its fury had diminished somewhat from its earlier peak. Through the circular opening, he could see gray sky and the jagged silhouette of Wolf's Point's upper rocks. He helped Vincent through the hatch first, then pulled himself up and out onto the storm-lashed surface of the point. They emerged on the leeward side of the rock, partially sheltered from the worst of the wind. The house was visible about 100 yards away, a portion of its structure still standing defiantly against the elements. "We made it," Vincent murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm's diminished roar. "I didn't think we would, but we made it." Nathan nodded grimly, securing the hatch behind them to prevent more water from entering the tunnel system. The worst of the storm had passed, but the danger was far from over. Vincent needed medical attention for his injured leg, and Nathan's heart clenched at the thought of his son waiting anxiously in the damaged house with only Kevin for company. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the house when Nathan heard it, the unmistakable bark of a German shepherd, followed by a higher-pitched sound that he would have recognized anywhere, Ethan's voice calling his name. Through the thinning rain, he saw them, Ranger bounding across the wet rock with sure-footed grace, Ethan close behind his small figure, silhouetted against the gray sky. Behind them came Mark and Kevin, moving more cautiously across the treacherous surface. Dad Ethan collided with Nathan at full speed, nearly knocking him off balance, despite the difference in their sizes. His son's arms wrapped around him with desperate strength, as if afraid he might disappear again. "You came back. I knew you would." Nathan held his son close, feeling the rapid beat of his heart, the miracle of his warm living presence. The fear and tension of the past hours seemed to drain away, replaced by a profound gratitude that bordered on awe. They had faced the storm, confronted enemies, both human and elemental, and emerged intact. "I promised, didn't I?" And Carters keep their promises. Mark approached more slowly, his expression guarded as he took in Vincent's injured condition and their unexpected emergence from a different part of the point. "The station gone," Nathan replied simply, "buried under tons of rock. The structural integrity failed completely." The big man nodded, unsurprised. "I figured as much when the tremors started." He gestured toward the house. Coast Guard radioed. "They've picked up the submersible crew, 6 foreign nationals, with diplomatic credentials claiming engine trouble." His laugh was short and humorless. Convenient explanation for being in U.S. waters during a hurricane. The rest of the group began making their way back toward what remained of the house, seeking what shelter they could from the continuing rain. Nathan lingered a moment, looking out over the churning gray sea that had nearly claimed them. The storm was moving inland now, its main force spent, leaving behind a world scoured clean and strangely peaceful despite the destruction. Ranger pressed against his leg, a solid, comforting presence. The dog's amber eyes met his, conveying that same silent understanding that had struck Nathan when they first met at the harbor. They were kindred spirits, guardians of a legacy now transformed. A week later, the storm's physical evidence remained etched across Wolf's Point. The house was a partial ruin, the boathouse completely gone, and Vincent's yacht had been reduced to scattered debris along the shoreline. But there were other changes, 2 signs of renewal and purpose, that gave the desolate rock a new energy. A Coast Guard cutter was anchored offshore, its white hull bright against the now calm blue water. Several uniformed personnel moved efficiently around a temporary shelter, erected near the remains of the house, setting up communications equipment and weather-resistant accommodations. Nathan stood on the highest point of the rock, the place where he and Ethan had activated the defense system during the height of the storm. Beside him stood an older man with silver hair and the erect posture of a lifelong military officer. His uniform bore the insignia of a Navy admiral, and his weathered face held both authority and a hint of wry humor. Admiral Johnson surveyed the activity below with approval. "Your grandfather would be pleased, Carter. He built this place to protect something valuable, and that's exactly what you did." Nathan nodded, his gaze drawn to where Ethan was helping the Coast Guard personnel unload supplies, Ranger a constant shadow at his side. The boy had thrived in the aftermath of the crisis, his previous anxiety replaced by a newfound confidence and purpose. "He's the real hero. I was just following his lead." The Admiral smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "The technical teams have confirmed what we suspected. That submarine was carrying specialized recovery equipment, deep-sea salvage gear, designed to extract technology from underwater installations. They weren't just coming to look. They were planning to take everything." And now Nathan asked, though he already knew the answer. "The station is lost, buried under enough rock to make recovery impossible." Johnson's tone was matter of fact. "But the technology, the concepts behind it, those are still viable. Your grandfather was decades ahead of his time. The natural acoustic amplification properties of this rock formation alone make it strategically significant." A question formed in Nathan's mind, one that had been building since the Coast Guard had arrived with their efficient operation and obvious preparedness. "You knew about this place all along, didn't you? The Navy never lost track of what Grandpa Samuel was doing out here?" Johnson's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "We suspected. Samuel Carter was too valuable an asset to lose track of completely, but he was also too stubborn and too brilliant to control. Sometimes the best strategy is to give a gifted person space to create on their own terms." His expression grew more serious. "He chose you as his successor for a reason, Carter. The question is, what do you intend to do with that inheritance?" Nathan considered the question carefully. The events of the past week had changed him, had changed all of them. Vincent was in custody, facing charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for years. Mark surprisingly had turned out to be an undercover naval intelligence officer assigned to track Vincent's activities after suspicious financial transactions were flagged. And Nathan himself had found something on this desolate rock that he'd thought lost forever purpose. "I want to rebuild," he said finally. "Not the listening station that's gone, but the Guardian post, the silent watch. This rock has strategic value and someone needs to protect it." His gaze shifted to Ethan, who was now demonstrating to an amused Coast Guard officer how to properly throw a stick for Ranger. "But I have responsibilities. My son needs stability, education, a normal life." Johnson followed his gaze, understanding immediately. "We could make arrangements. A new facility properly built to withstand the elements. Living quarters for permanent staff, including family accommodations. Educational resources." He turned to face Nathan directly. "Your country still needs guardians, Carter. Silent sentinels who understand the value of watching rather than striking. Samuel saw that quality in you. So do I." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. It wasn't just employment being offered, but a continuation of the legacy Samuel had entrusted to him, a chance to honor that trust while building something new. Before Nathan could respond, Ethan came bounding up the slope toward them, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, the Coast Guard lieutenant says there's a school on the mainland where I could go 3 days a week and then have classes by satellite the rest of the time. And they're bringing materials to build a new house, a real one with strong walls and everything." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his eyes bright with the possibilities he saw unfolding. He had taken to the Coast Guard personnel, immediately absorbing their knowledge of the sea weather patterns and communication systems with the natural curiosity that had always characterized him. On Wolf's Point, his differences, his sensitivity, his deep emotional responses, his occasional anxiety weren't liabilities but strengths, attunements that made him an ideal inhabitant of this unique place. "What do you think, Sentinel?" Nathan asked, kneeling to meet his son at eye level. "Would you want to stay here? Make this our home permanently?" Ethan's response was immediate and certain. "This is where we belong, Dad. It's where great-grandpa wanted us to be." His young face grew solemn wise beyond his years. "Someone has to keep watch, right? That's what you always say, the price of safety is eternal vigilance." Nathan felt a surge of emotion at hearing his own words reflected back to him through his son's understanding. He stood turning to Admiral Johnson with newfound certainty. "We accept, but on one condition: we do this as a family. Ethan isn't just my responsibility, he's my partner in this." Johnson nodded, extending his hand to seal the agreement. "Welcome to the Silent Service, Carters. Both of you." 6 months later, Wolf's Point was transformed. Where the old, weather-beaten house had stood, a new structure now rose against the sky, a modern facility designed to withstand the worst the Atlantic could throw at it. Solar panels and improved tidal generators provided reliable power, and a sophisticated communications array maintained constant contact with the mainland. But it wasn't just a military outpost. It was a home. The living quarters were comfortable and warm with large windows facing the sea. A small greenhouse attached to the southern side provided fresh vegetables year-round. And most importantly, there was room for a family to grow and thrive in this isolated but purpose-filled existence. Nathan stood on the observation deck watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Beside him, Ethan was focused on a tablet computer, completing a school assignment with the serious concentration he brought to all his tasks. Ranger lay between them, his gray and white coat gleaming in the fading light, his vigilant eyes scanning the horizon with professional interest. The submarine threat had been neutralized, the diplomatic incident carefully managed through channels that would never see public light. Vincent had accepted a plea deal trading information for a reduced sentence. The technology Samuel had pioneered was being studied and adapted by a new generation of engineers, its potential for defensive applications fully recognized. But here on Wolf's Point, the most important legacy continued: the silent watch, the patient guardianship of something valuable. Not just strategic territory or military advantage, but the more fundamental gifts of peace, security, and the chance for a family to heal and grow stronger together. Nathan rested his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the solid presence of the boy who had shown such unexpected courage in the face of danger. Ethan looked up from his work, a smile lighting his features. "The world out there never stops changing, does it, Dad?" Nathan gazed at the vast expanse of ocean, stretching to the horizon, thinking of all it concealed and revealed all its dangers and wonders. "No, it doesn't. That's why the watch never ends." But for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since he'd returned from his final deployment, Nathan felt truly at peace with that endless vigil. Here on this rock with his son and their faithful guardian, he had found not just purpose, but belonging. Samuel's legacy wasn't the technology buried beneath the stone, but the understanding that true security came not from weapons or walls, but from the willingness to stand guard to protect what mattered most. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above Wolf's Point, the sentinels maintained their watch, silent, vigilant, and finally completely home.